now 7 o'clock, and I call this meeting of the Silver Falls School District Budget Committee to order. We are all in attendance save one, so I think we're good. Oh, two. I think we're good to conduct business, though. Item number 2 is to discuss the Budget Committee procedural rules, and I think our business director is going to help us with that.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everyone, for coming. This is a great turnout on a wonderful weather evening here, so thank you for coming. You know, there's 2 attachments under this item, and one is basically a policy or resolution that the board passed, I believe in 2020, about decorum, and hopefully you've had a chance to look at that. We're not going to read that. And then the other document is basically a roles and responsibilities of the Budget Committee document. We don't read that verbatim either, but in my email here about a week and a half ago, there was a video, OSBA webinar that was about 35 minutes long that hopefully some of you had an opportunity to view that, but it's really summarized in this document as well. So I guess instead of reading through the document, I guess I would ask if there's any any questions before we would move along to electing our budget committee chair.
I don't think we have the document in our packet.
Nope.
I'm sorry, it's on board book.
Oh, it's on board book.
I see. Okay. Just to clarify, this body this body puts forth the budget to the board to recommend, and then there's a hearing during a regular board meeting, and
Right.
that's when the budget's approved, correct?
That's correct. And I do have some slides in my presentation, that 2 slides on the roles and responsibilities and exactly what our outcome is. So that's part of what I do as well. But I'd be happy to read the document. I didn't know I was doing this part.
That's fine.
Sorry.
I just want to make sure we're
Yeah,
covering it.
absolutely.
That's fine. I trust
Yeah.
that your slide is gonna.
So the top 3 talking points are: the Budget Committee is charged with holding 1 or more meetings to receive the budget message and the budget document, 2, provide members of the public an opportunity to ask questions about and comment upon the budget document, and 3, approve the budget document as submitted by the budget officer or as revised and prepared by the Budget Committee. So, there can be as many meetings as you would like. The Budget Committee does approve the budget. You all are equal members of a body of 14. There must be 8 people to approve, 8 yes votes, and then it goes to the board, the 7-member board, for a budget hearing, which usually runs concurrently with the June board meeting. In this case, Monday, June 12th, and the board would then take the action to adopt the approved budget and appropriate funds for the year, as well as levy the property taxes. One thing that gets forgotten about in the Budget Committee process often is, besides approving the proposed budget as presented or amended, the Budget Committee also helps set the levy rate, so the permanent rate for the operations of the taxes for operations for Silver Falls is $4.88 per thousand. But you'll see on your property tax statement, of course, we're paying a bond for the high school phase 2 that expires in 2027. So the board, the Budget Committee helps approve that part of the tax that we have to levy to pay the debt service on the property tax as well. So, or for the levy for the debt service. So there's important roles, and there's more to this document about kind of where the level of focus should be. We're obviously here to answer any questions. There's going to be a lot of detail. I apologize in advance. There's quite a bit of sit and get tonight, but our goal is to help show how the funds are used, how they tie to our strategic plan, answer those questions, as well as kind of get into the numbers and the details, our current standing, what our goals are, and everything. So.
Perfect. Thank you, Steve. All right, next item on the list is to elect a chair and a vice chair. I will accept a motion. Oh, by the way, this can be anybody. Generally, it goes to a non-board member. And you can self-nominate if you'd like.
I nominate Wally Luhrmann.
Do you need a second or just a nomination?
That is a good question. I think just the nomination. Wally, you accept your nomination?
Yeah, well.
Okay. Wait. Procedurally,
So the way we did it in years past.
we discuss.
We accepted nominations, then we had a conversation, and then we voted on candidates
Okay.
who had agreed
That-
to
That makes sense.
move forward. So that's what we did last time.
I'm going to say that's what we're going to do. Any other nominations?
Yeah, I'll nominate Matt Plummer. I know he served as our chair last year and did a nice job.
I accept.
Thank you. I didn't ask you, right? Any others? All right, I'll open it up for discussion. Just raise your hand if you would like to speak. It's very awkward. Yes.
They both do a fantastic job.
Yes. Yeah.
How is the vote going to work?
Well, we will, that's a good question too, because usually a motion, and a motion with a second, you discuss and then you vote. And so in this case, we have two. So I think we would probably just go down the line and people would just say who they're
Just
going to
name
vote
who
for.
they would prefer. Okay.
Yeah. Or we could, let's do it that way. It's really clear that way.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to vote then unless y'all have something to say.
I am, knowing the responsibility that comes with this role, willing to step back and vice chair, just for ease of process, I guess.
Okay.
Unless somebody really wants me.
I was actually going to do the same, so.
So we're voting on vice chair, and then
Seems like we got a white ballot for vice and chair, right?
Matt pulled out first,
Yeah.
so.
Well, they both accepted the nomination, so I think we got to vote one way or the
Perfect.
other.
Let's do that.
Yep, very awkward, but Debbie, go ahead and call the roll.
We will start with Wally.
Matt.
So I will just call your name and you say.
Would-
All right, so this vote is for Wally. Hillary.
Matt.
Just as myself.
Wally.
You already did vote.
Yeah.
He said Matt.
Matt.
Wally.
Matt.
I'll go Matt.
Jimmy.
Matt.
Brian.
Wally.
Janet.
Matt.
Tom.
Wally.
Jonathan.
Wally. I'm just seeing if we can
Aaron.
tie.
Wally.
Lori.
Matt.
Jennifer.
Matt.
Owen.
Wally.
Did everybody get a vote?
I don't.
Not everybody voted, I don't
Lynn
think.
is not here.
Brian?
Yeah.
You did.
We're good.
Laura, you voted, right? Yeah.
I voted.
Hillary, you
Tied.
voted? Okay. Sorry.
Do we have an even numbers?
Who didn't vote? Anybody didn't vote?
Did Wally vote for himself?
Yeah.
No, he voted for Matt.
Jennifer, did I get you? Yeah.
Mhm.
I have a vote.
You should have 13.
It should be uneven, hold on. Oh, there we go, 6. Because Hillary, you voted for.
Correct.
Wally, you voted for.
Matt.
Matt.
So 7 is Matt Plummer, 6 is Wally.
Well, all right.
All
I'm gonna
right.
Step aside.
All right. Well, thank you for the support. We now need a vice chair.
I'll nominate Wally for vice chair.
Any other nominees? Oh, sorry. Do you accept?
I do.
All right. Anyone else? All right. Shall we vote?
All right. Hillary,
Wally.
Wally,
Yes.
Max,
Yes.
Matt, Plummer,
Wally.
Ginny,
Wally.
Brian,
Wally?
Janet,
Wally.
Tom,
Wally.
Jonathan,
Wally.
Aaron,
Wally.
Lori,
Can I have some time to think about this? No, I'm kidding, Wally.
Jennifer,
Wally.
and Owen Von Blue.
Wally.
All in favor.
All right. Thank you. On to superintendent's budget message.
Thank you, Matt. Good evening, members of the Silver Falls School District Budget Committee. Tonight, we present to you the proposed school district budget for fiscal year 2023-24. I want to take a moment to reflect on the journey that brought us here. It has truly been a roller coaster ride over the past 3 years. We've managed to weather the unprecedented storm, and now we're resetting ourselves based on our new reality. We're working to address learning loss and social emotional learning, but also right-sizing based on our new enrollment levels and increased costs. If it were not for one-time ESSER funds, FEMA reimbursements, and the pension obligation bond, aggressive cuts would have likely occurred already. While I'm proud that we have made it to this point, we can't rule out the possibility of cuts depending on where the state budget lands, alongside other factors. We also need to start building up our reserves ASAP. I recommend the board consider an 8% policy level, down from the current policy level of 10%, and I'll talk about this more towards the end of my presentation. In a few minutes, our finance director, Steve Nielsen, will go into greater detail. However, I'd like to take this opportunity to run you through a high-level overview of the 2023-24 proposed budget. It would be impossible to discuss our budget or budgeting process without a clear focus on the goals of our strategic plan. Number one, each student is on track to graduate every year. 2, each student has the social emotional learning skills to navigate their world. And 3, facilities reflect our love and respect for our students. The proposed budget continues to tie directly to the first 2 goals of that plan, and I'll address the 3rd goal later in this message. The 2023-24 proposed school district budget is based on a $10.1 billion state school fund. For the 2023 to 2025 biennium, with a 49%, 51% split. The state budget has yet to be finalized by the Oregon legislature, and lawmakers will not adopt the 23-25 budget until after the June quarterly economic forecast, which is released next Wednesday, May 17th. We will discuss those results at our second budget committee meeting, which is on May 25th. Both the governor's and the legislative co-chair's biennial budgets are based on $9.9 billion state school fund allocation. OSBA, COSA, and other groups are strongly advocating for $10.3 billion in funding, which is the amount needed to retain current service levels. We've chosen to budget right in the middle of the $9.9 and $10.3 billion levels. However, even with a $10.1 billion funding level, we project a $600,000 deficit for the 23-24. This would mean tapping into already meager reserves to balance the budget. This is a trend that must reverse course no later than the 24-25 fiscal year. The reasons for the 23-24 proposed $600,000 deficit, as well as a depleted fund balance, which currently sits at $2 million, or 4% of the general fund expenditures, are many. Enrollment decline, which began after the onset of the pandemic. I'll address that in further detail shortly. Renewed investments in our staff through collective bargaining agreements. Long overdue textbook adoptions in math and English language arts planned for 23-24, totaling over $600,000. Transportation cost increases. Increased cybersecurity requirements by our insurance carrier, resulting in a necessary technology department staffing increase of 1 full-time equivalent, or FTE. Budgeted 5% cost of living adjustment for our classified staff, and negotiations are just beginning for the 2023-24 fiscal year forward. One-time ESSER funds, or pandemic-related federal relief funds, will be fully exhausted by late 2023. A 15% increase in property casualty insurance premiums, a 49% allocation of the state school fund in the first year of the biennium. As we previously discussed, Silver Falls School District has been fortunate for many years to have had steady or slightly increasing enrollment and thus increasing funding levels. At the height of the pandemic and its associated changes to school programming and scheduling, 10.6%, or 416 students, withdrew from SFSD schools. To date, we've welcomed back 138 of those students, or 33% of those we lost. We are not the only school district facing this issue. In fact, enrollment is down 5.3% statewide and has not recovered at all. Nevertheless, this drop in enrollment resulted in a $2 million net decrease to SFSD's 2021-23 state school fund revenue. This reduction in enrollment has a direct impact on our funding. However, I want to make it clear that in line with our first and second goals, we remain committed to ensuring every child in our district has the opportunity and support they need to make up for the learning gaps they experienced as a result of the pandemic. More importantly, we are now finishing year 3 of a 5-year plan to implement a guaranteed, viable, and standards-based curriculum for all students in Silver Falls School District. This strategy enables us to promote and protect equitable educational practices by providing every one of our students with universal access to high-quality curriculum, assessment, and instruction, and as a result, equitable educational outcomes. It's critical that district maintains a balanced and sustainable budget while holding a minimum general fund reserve per board policy. The impacts of the pandemic created a great deal of flux and constant change over the past 3 budget cycles. Current resources and requirements have not aligned, and this must change moving forward. Additionally, the general fund ending balance has fallen below the board policy level of 10%. As I mentioned earlier, I'm recommending the board adopt a new policy establishing an ending fund balance minimum requirement of 8%. Our goal is to meet the mandated threshold, once again, no later than June 30th, 2027. Without a doubt, our current ending fund balance remains a significant concern. We recently concluded the bargaining process with SFEA, and we begin bargaining with our classified employee group next week. The new license bargaining agreement carries a heavier cost than we'd originally budgeted for in the current biennium, and the costs associated with the new classified bargaining agreement remain to be seen. As superintendent, I remain committed to protecting jobs. We have not reached the point where we will be forced to lay off employees in order to balance the budget. This is not to say that our staffing levels today or next year will be the same as those pre-pandemic, but rather we've managed This by re-examining specific needs as natural employee turnover, also known as employee attrition, occurs, as well as by asking our administrative team to creatively think about the way specific roles are filled, tasks accomplished, and students supported. What we're talking about here can be thought of as right sizing. As specific programmatic needs and funding levels shift, so too can staffing levels. A funding level decrease does not necessarily equate to a decrease in the quality of a program. Indeed, it often means we've found better or more efficient ways to deliver service. To date, no one in Silver Falls School District has lost their job or been laid off due to the funding gap. Outside of the conversation around the district's operational budget, and in line with our strategic goal that facilities reflect our love and respect for our students, our Bond Advisory Committee, or BAC, will be completing their year-long work next Tuesday, in which they'll be determining a final facilities bond recommendation for the school board to consider at the June 12th meeting. As part of that work, we once again engaged in community listening and learning sessions at all 10 of our district schools. We are so grateful to our community members and our BAC members, BAC members, who attended those sessions. From their feedback, we created a report for the BAC to use as they revised their draft of the bond proposal to create a final proposal for the board's consideration. The executive summary and full meeting minutes can be found on the school district website. The average age of the facilities in our district is over 60 years old. It appears likely that a bond measure will be placed on the November 2023 ballot, pending school board discussion and approval, with the goal of replacing Silverton Middle School and performing significant repairs or renovations on every other school in the district. I cannot state often enough the reality that the longer we wait to address our facilities' needs, the more expensive they will become. As the saying goes, the best time to resolve these issues was 10 years ago. The second best time is today. I want to briefly mention that I'm personally very excited about our investment in this year, investment this year in updated textbooks for students around our district as we adopt a new math curriculum for students in grades K through 5 and 9 through 12, as well as a new English language arts curriculum for grades 6 through 8. This is a line item that is easy to kick down the road when balancing a budget. And in fact, that is exactly what has occurred for many years. However, in line with the goals of our strategic plan, we simply can't afford to wait any longer. Finally, allow me to look a bit past the 23-24 school year for a moment. For 2024-25, I believe we're looking at brighter days on the horizon, and that 23-24 is really a transition year. In 2024-25, we will have a 51% state school fund allocation, be past our big textbook adoptions. We'll know the outcome of the bond. We'll have settled contracts with both of our employee associations, and we will continue to monitor enrollment and make staffing decisions accordingly. We continue to hear from our community that the goals of our strategic plan represent what they want to see from their school district. The budget you'll see tonight represents a great work from very bright people who have worked through the issues facing our district and come to conclusions that represent a path forward. I want to express my sincere appreciation for them, as well as for your willingness to be here and to work through this process with us. And I want to say thank you from the heart, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Leslie Roach.
Hello, everyone. Hello. If you are new on the Budget Committee tonight, you have the privilege of going through the integrated application nomination presentation with me for the first time. School board members, I think this will be number 3 for you. So you've seen it a few times. This is something we've been working on for quite some time in the district, and we just want to give a really broad picture of all of the different funding sources that we're getting as a school district and how we're spending that. So for background, the Oregon Department of Education has integrated 6 different spending revenues into one grant application. Now, we're in the midst of that, and it's already been approved by our school board, so this is just information for you this evening. So we have combined processes for community engagement. We've done a needs assessment, planning, budgeting, evaluations for 6 different programs. And it's designed to reduce the burden and redundancies, so we're not all up here presenting about different funding sources and grants and having to get all of those approved. It's one time for the next 4 years. So these are the actual 6 programs coming from the state and actual federal as well. High School Success is Measure 98, Student Investment Account, the Continuous Improvement Plan, Career and Technical Education, Everyday Matters, and Early Indicator and Intervention Systems. That's a lot of things. This is actually what all of those things are for. High School Success is meant for improving graduation rates and college and career readiness. Student Investment Account is meant for students' mental health, behavioral needs, and to increase academic achievement, and is specifically to reduce disparities for student focal groups. Our continuous improvement planning is a process that we involve our educators, we collaborate, we look at data analysis, professional learning and reflection to constantly improve our student outcomes. Career and Technical Education is Perkins funding, and that's actually federal funding. Early Indicator and Intervention Systems is all around data collection and analysis. And Everyday Matters is embedded in all of these, and it's really focused around student engagement, culture, climate, safety, and attendance is when you see a lot of Everyday Matters attendance. So these were the major members of our planning team. So Kirsten Barnes here at the high school, Patrick Mulligan at the high school, Jamie McCarty representing our K-8 community, Sheldon Lizier representing the teachers union, Brett Davison, myself, and Kim Dowd here at the central office. So these are the required steps that we have to go through when planning. We use an equity lens, we have community engagement. We do not qualify for tribal consultation in our district because that's based on the amount of students you have who are considered qualifying in that area. We do a comprehensive needs assessment. We look at the Oregon Quality Education Model and student success plans. We review our regional CTE consortia. And then we look at a variety of potential impact on student focal groups and look at a 4-year plan with clear outcome strategies and activities. So this is the equity lens tool that we use for decision making. This is on our website if anyone wants to do more research and look at it more closely. A highlight of community engagement, which many of you have been at, is all of our listening and learning sessions. Our superintendent presents frequently to the board around student achievement data. Our Youth Truth surveys for students, parents, and staff. We had many different focal groups. Scott led a focal group, multiple focal groups with our Sequoia Falls students. The high school and the middle school led focal groups through student clubs. Our community liaison did phone surveys specifically to our Spanish-speaking families and our families who qualify for unhoused under McKinney-Vento. And then we also had meetings with community group leaders and church leaders in our community. The high school really does a great job with CTE with career day and advisory groups, also getting lots of input. Our needs assessment highlights really centered around student achievement data for the last 7 years. We found that our student focal groups are achieving consistently less across 3rd grade reading. So for 7 years, the aim lines were consistently up separate. There was no growth there. Our Youth Truth Survey data for the last 3 years, our student focal groups really felt less connected to our student communities. Our school communities value a really well-rounded education. If you've been in the district for long, you know that music is a really important subject here, and we did have a whole music work group, and we're going to talk about music teachers tonight in the budget. Attendance rates and GPA rates for students who participate in the summer transition programs. So we call it Fox Camp. So incoming 9th graders have a summer Fox Camp. We see students who participate in that have significantly higher attendance, grades, all of that than their peers. And students involved in accelerated coursework or CTE coursework at the high school have higher graduation rates. So after looking at all of our data, this is kind of the focus of where our plan went. Mental health supports for students, a focus on dropout prevention, focusing on instruction to support our student focal groups, well-rounded education, specifically music, a new data system to support student data tracking, focus on transition supports between grades and schools, development of cross-curricular alignment based on post-secondary student plans, and provide opportunities for expansion of CTE and advanced coursework. So our intended outcomes, you're going to see these written as goals. We've talked a lot about these. We really looked at our data, and we're trying to take across all demographic groups setting goals. So 90% graduation rate across all demographic groups. 100% of 9th graders on track to graduate with a focus on our English language learners enrolling in the appropriate coursework to ensure on-time graduation. 53% of 3rd graders reading at grade level across all demographic groups, and 95% of students regularly attending school with a focus on our students with disabilities and students of color. So these are the things we're doing to achieve our outcomes. We are providing a therapeutic educational setting for high school students, Sequoia Falls Academy. We are providing professional development for all staff in order to provide equitable learning outcomes across the district. We're really focusing on transition planning between grade levels and schools. We're implementing a multi-tiered system of support. We're implementing engaging music instruction for all students across the district, and we're providing multiple opportunities for students to access advanced CTE and coursework. Okay, so talking about just budget this evening. So we don't know our exact allocation yet because it hasn't gone through all of the legislature yet. But our estimate for SIA is about $2.5 million, and for high school success is about $1.1 million. Those are the two biggest funding sources out of those 6. So these are the major things that we're funding, just as a snapshot. So Sequoia Falls Academy, additional school counselors and social workers, our guaranteed and viable curriculum work, which includes professional development and instructional coaches, high qualified music teachers, staff and programs to assist grade level transitions, CTE staff, professional development and materials, and community engagement. And this budget template and the whole planning and application is on our website, so you can read more. We do have a tiered budget so that if the funding does come out higher or lower, we can make different decisions. And so that is all attached, and we can be nimble, as the state says. So we would increase instructional coaches, increase a focus on transition opportunities, and additional professional development if we do see increased funding. So the state is setting really clear targets with each district individually and doing annual reporting. So this is a very fancy slide they made for us, and we'll go into the details. They're called longitudinal performance growth targets, and they're going to collaborate with each district individually, look at our student data, and to set these targets. So the data, we have data available, And these are the metrics that they're going to measure our success on. So 3rd grade reading proficiency rates, 9th grade on track rates, regular attendance rates, 4-year or on-time graduation rates, and 5-year completion rates. And then we can use other local metrics if we believe we need to look at more items. So looking at that, very similar. We tried to write our goals to be very similar to what we'll be measuring. So 90% graduation, 100% of 9th graders on track. This is just a repeat of what our outcomes are. So what happens next? So like I said, this is just an informational presentation for our budget committee so you understand all of this other extra money and what we're funding. We are currently in the review process. ODE has given us feedback just last week. Our team had a meeting this morning to respond to the feedback, and we're going to be submitting more information to ODE in the next few weeks. And so we're on track right now with everything that's going on with all of those funding sources. So that was a lot of information in a very short amount of time. And if you haven't been following the board meetings, this might be new to you. So I'm here this evening if there are more questions or at our next budget committee meeting. And I am turning it over to Dan.
And I only have 2 slides, so I think I'll just stay right here. So on the last year, we presented where our investments were going towards to try to have better standardization across our district, and Leslie talked about music. And so for this school year, we were able to get meet our standardization goals for PE. So every school across our district had a very similar PE experience. And 2 places where I'd like to highlight that would be at Silvercrest and Evergreen, where they've got a dedicated PE teacher that they haven't always had before. And I will tell you that both schools have reported just how great that is to have that experience for their kids. And I will tell you that their teachers are very appreciative of being able to have somebody else do PE than them doing PE and figuring out how to cover that. So it's also reduced teacher workload concerns at both of those locations, and has been a real, I know one principal talks about just kind of the shot in the arm of positivity that the kids just love going to PE with that dedicated PE teacher who's trained in that. So can't say enough about having that PE at every school. Music teacher at every school, we got really close last year. That was a little bit of a late hiring process, and so every K-8 school did get, all K-8, K-5 got music, not to the degree that we were hoping for, but we got close to what we were hoping for. So for going into this year is to continue to maintain the consistent PE experience. We do have music covered and at most of our schools, and we have a posting for a Butte Creek and Scotts Mills music teacher, and so we are hoping that if we can get that position filled, we will have a consistent music experience for all of our K-8 and K-5 kids. So we feel like since we're out there now looking for that person, that we'll be able to do that. And then our goals moving forward would be around a student success coach. And this is to address in our strategic plan, our SEL goals, is to have a supportive person there to work with students on social and emotional learning and behavior regulation and things of that nature. And so we have that currently at Robert Frost and Silverton High School. We're going to be adding that at Silverton Middle School. And I know that the K-8 schools are wishing that they can get that position added to them. So that's a long-term goal. And I think that's part of the tiered support that Leslie talked about. If we get more funding, that would be an area of priority, is to try to get student success coaches at every school.
Is that different than a counselor?
Yes. So I think in previous, you might refer to it as a dean of students typically in kind of previous days. But it's working more in trying to coach students through any kind of challenges that they're having and support teachers. So Great question, though. So since we did just finish bargaining with our teachers union here less than a month ago, one of the things that you probably heard a lot of, and so I thought I would address it here tonight, is class size, because that became, you know, kind of one of the last issues. And so these class size targets you see on the left, those are class size targets that reside in an MOU that was agreed upon with SFEA. So those are our targeted class sizes for our self-contained classrooms K through 8. And then if you're at the middle or the high school, if you are teaching in a core content area, which would be like science or math or English language arts, you would have no more than 180 students per term. Now, one of the reasons why I didn't just go 6 through 12 on that over on the right is that at Silverton Middle School, if you are like an English language arts teacher, you would also count your advisory students. So that's how we kind of agreed on that. But at the high school, your advisory or homeroom does not factor into that calculation. And then you can also see the caseloads for those specialty areas. And so the agreement with SFEA was that we would be monitoring those, that we'd work through trying to support teachers if they exceeded those. There is a $30,000 pool that if those caseloads or class sizes can't be achieved, and a committee would say, approve a 1.5 salary increase for if we couldn't meet those targets and supports could not be achieved. And so then on this, that is a hyperlink there that you can go to for our dashboard, which this is just a screenshot of the dashboard that you can go to, and there's some drop downs there. You can go to any school and you can see exactly what the class sizes are across the district. And if you were to scroll down a little bit more, you can see middle school and high school, and you can actually go and see how many students are on every teacher's case, or what every teacher has there. And on the right, you can see the special programs caseloads. I will tell you, when we released this during bargaining, even prior to reaching the MOU agreement, teachers loved this. They loved the transparency of it. They loved to be able to go and look and kind of, because sometimes you get the mythology that gets out there and you can actually go and see what people have. So I think this is going to be a really useful tool for the district moving forward. All right.
Thank you, Dan. Really appreciate it. We decided to reverse the order this year after the budget message. We thought it would be, I think, it just makes more sense to talk more about how the dollars tie to the strategic plan and how they're being used before getting into accounting nerdville stuff. So Daniel, if you could switch it over to the other show. So while Daniel's doing that for us, I just wanted to formally, on the recording here, we didn't really say it up front, welcome our new budget committee members, Hillary, Brian, Max, and Jenny. Thank you so much for serving on the committee. So really happy to have you here. So I am going to spend a little time talking about the past 40 months. I know for those of you here that are school board members, we've talked many times through this storm, but it's important, I think, to bring everyone up to speed on where we're at and kind of how we got where we are and where we need to go. So, but before I do that, I wanted to formally thank Kim Dowd, our controller, who's also been doing payroll quite a bit this year because we've been down a payroll person. We do have Eva with us now. We're really excited to have her. And also Sharon, I think you're watching online, Sharon Etzel, and Luis Chavez, who joined us as an accounting specialist here last month for all their help on the budget, and of course Debbie for all of her support as well, and my team. So we'll go ahead and get into this. So I apologize for the choppy start, Jennifer. I did have some slides that address this, but I'm sorry I wasn't coordinated on the opening item. But what I'm going to talk about is our timeline, process, and roles, district financial background and status, and then lastly, we'll just sit down and do a quick surf through the actual document, and I'll point out some highlights and just some, basic notes and the way that it's formatted. So I do want to mention that in the last 3 years, the first budget committee meeting has either been the last Thursday of April, the first Thursday of May, or the second Thursday in May. And last year it was the last Thursday in April. So typically in an odd-numbered year, we do typically wait till the first or second week of May because the legislature typically has not passed the state budget. So we do try to, as much as we can, gain a little bit of extra time to get more knowledge. Because as you know, the budget is basically the best information we have at this time. And there's a lot of things that happen between now and the start of the school year and then through the school year that change and we have to manage and adapt to. So as Scott mentioned in his budget presentation, the legislature will not do anything until they've at least heard the June quarterly economic forecast, which in this case is released in May 17th. That comes out next Wednesday. So what we've done is set up our 2 budget committee meetings to straddle this information here. Hopefully they'll start getting some quorums in the Senate. I don't know what's been happening the last couple days. That's been an issue here the last 5 days or so, and they'll start talking again. But we're going to get that information and talk about it and update anything that comes out of that at our next meeting. And we'll send some things out before then. We'll get this out to you before the next meeting. And then end of May, early June would be our target date to approve the proposed budget either as presented or adopted. And then, of course, both the state and Silver Falls School District, by law, must adopt the fiscal year budget for 23-24 and make appropriations and levy taxes. I am excited to bring back coffee hour opportunities. I believe this started during the pandemic, maybe before. But next week, actually, since we only have 1 week between the 2 meetings this year, informal kind of Q&A, an opportunity to dig even deeper than time allows for here tonight. And so the key is that we cannot have any more than 6 of our 14-member committee at any one meeting and no more than 3 school board members. So next Tuesday from 7:30 to 8:30 a.m. in the district office. Next Tuesday during the lunch hour, a virtual meeting. And then Wednesday from 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. So if you're interested, it's completely optional. Please just email me and I'll get you slotted in there. So. All right, so Jennifer, so we have just the basic responsibilities here. So I did fail to mention Scott's budget committee, superintendent's budget message, Dan and Leslie's presentation, and this presentation will all be posted to Board Book and added to that agenda by tomorrow morning for your reference. This is an active link to that OSBA webinar that I had sent out in the email previously. Roles, we already talked a little bit about that. And then ultimately, the end result. So once this body passes an approved budget along to the board conducts a budget hearing. Again, it's in conjunction with the June board meeting. And this is the end result. Essentially, the school board will adopt a budget and make appropriations in all of these different fund categories, which we'll talk a little bit more about these as we go through the evening. But that's what the resolution actually looked like from last year. And then also to impose the taxes, and in this case, here's that permanent rate. It's actually 4.5458, and then general obligation debt service, we had to levy a little over $4.4 million last year to meet our debt service obligation on the general obligation bond, which retires in June 2027. All right, so now we're going to rewind just a little bit here. Bonus points if anyone could tell me which roller coaster that is. It's my favorite. It's I don't even know if it's still there. Colossus, Six Flags Magic Mountain in California. And so Scott mentioned in his, I'm not trying to make light of anything here, but in his budget message, he talked about the roller coaster we've been on, and it clearly has been, not just with school budget, but obviously everyone within our school district and all of our personal lives. And we have I think we've weathered the storm, and so we've kind of gone from the vicious storm to maybe still kind of being in some choppy waters, but I feel like we're resetting our course. And as Scott mentioned, kind of a transition year. So this is where we must start. This is that concerning piece that we've had, and again, we've talked about this a lot the last several years, but, and I actually want to return back to the 40 months comment. So I go back 40 months because I'm rewinding all the way back to January 13th, 2020. So there was January 13th and there was March 13th. January 13th, 2020, between 11 and midnight is when we settled the last contract with our Teachers Association. And it was great. We got that done and it felt good. There was a lot going on at that time. And we had some makeup to do on our schedule. We had some deficiencies where we weren't regionally competitive. So the settlement, financial settlement during that time was larger than anything previously, at least in my time here, 13% over 3 years. So we knew that we were going to cut into our ending fund balance then. Well, little did we know that 2 months later, March 13th, 2020, the official beginning of the pandemic and the shutdown of schools and everything else. So that kind of hit after that whole decision was made. So and then we just moved forward through time. So the 40 months, that's going back to January 13th, 2020. So we knew that we were sitting here June 30th, 2019 with an ending fund balance of about $4.7 million, which at that time was probably closer to 10% of general fund expenditures at that time, maybe slightly over. You can see we hit a high point here of 5.7. Now that's actually, I call this a false peak. The reason for that, and I know Brian has been a superintendent in Harrisburg for many years. He may remember 2017-19 biennium, for whatever reason, the legislature decided to allocate those funds on a 50-50 split, not a 49-51 split. So we received a 50% allocation in this year, which brought our balance up a little bit. So I kind of consider the 5 million mark or so our true high, because I like to look at this ending fund balance on a biennial basis. So nevertheless, that settlement from January 2020 then, hit here. So that's kind of where that, I guess I need to get used to using the that worked. Okay. So anyway, so it kind of, I'm not saying that was the whole thing, but definitely, was a lot, and we knew that would be a factor. So, so we did put, based on current expenditure level, less the pass-through payments to the charter school and contingencies, basically planned expenditures, this is where we should be now. I should also mention that I think that while we hoped in the second year of this biennium that we might see a slight increase in this year, I don't necessarily believe that's going to happen. The budget calls for a $2 million ending fund balance or beginning fund balance to use in 23-24. It could come in a little less than that. Again, we just settled with the Teachers Association on April 17th. When I talk about things that we don't know, we just found out on April 17th what we're paying our licensed staff for this year. And we've gone through almost the whole school year. So we have a big retro pay coming up here on May 25th. And so things have been as complex between things like this, all the new funds, the ESSER funds, and all the other things. It's been more an enrollment thing and trying to figure out how the rest of the state's doing, because that impacts us, and I'll get into that in a minute. As complex as anything I've seen in my 22 years. I also want to say that in my 22 years, the money, the funds, and how they're being tied back to a strategic plan, and that it's part of the daily operational focus and the board focus is also it's the best I've seen in my 22 years. So, I mean, just really, that's not an area of expertise for me, but I just really appreciate learning more about it as I go along and how we can help support the work. So again, here's general fund, ending fund balance, EFB, analysis for the last 3 years. So I've touched on a little bit. Again, they really shortchanged us for this biennium. They only jumped the state school funding level from 9.0 to $9.3 billion. The current service level was 9.6. Then of course, the pandemic broke out, enrollment dropped, all of that. So we talked about enrollment, but all the COVID-19 impacts, more needs in our buildings. They've been increasing as well. I do want to focus on the enrollment piece for a minute. This is small, but I believe there's actually in your supplemental section, and you'll get a lot more for your supplemental section. There's in fact some more handouts tonight, and we'll get you a hard copy of the budget message as well for the next meeting to put in your notebooks. But in the very back is this enrollment. I typically do one for the board each month. And this is our enrollment snapshot as of May 8th. So what it does do is it gives a history going all the way back to June 18th of 2020, where this was where we were living. Almost 4,000 students, including the charter schools. And so we didn't really see a drop off for the last 3 months of that 2019-20 school year when the pandemic started. But we started to really see it hit in the 2021 school year. That's when we lost a majority of our students, and then we hit this low June of 2022, that 416 that was mentioned in the budget message, minus 10%, 10.6%. Where we sit today, we've gone from the low of 3524 back to 3662. This number's been a little bit higher this year. We actually haven't had too bad of a drop off for the end of the year. Typically, we do see a decrease in enrollment from the high school after the holidays, but it hasn't been too bad. So this is a helpful resource. But this is the reconciled story. Now that we didn't know until February of this year exactly if the rest of the state had grown, if they had seen an enrollment recovery like we have. So we've recovered 35 to 40% of what we lost. We're still down 6%. If we had been going through that problem alone, I mean, just simple math, 400 students times, say, $9,000 per ADM. ADM stands for average daily membership, and I'll get more into that in a second. But that would have been a $7 million hit over the course of this biennium, and obviously we would have had a lot worse problems. But I'm now reconciling that our actual loss is coming out to a net loss of $2 million. So we knew that. So first of all, the state pays based on the current year enrollment or the prior year, whichever is higher. So even though we saw enrollment decrease in the 2020-21 school year, we were paid based on the 1920 school year, thank goodness. And so were all of the other districts. But we took the penalty for the loss in the 21-22 school year, and I have a graphic to show you that in just a moment. But so did other school districts. So we didn't take a $3.5 million loss for that year because all the school districts' enrollment went down by about 5%. We went down more than most. But what happened was we did lose potential revenue, but our amount per student did go up because there were less students in the system. So this could have been much, much worse. So what we saw happen this year was we saw nearly 40% of our students come back, but the statewide enrollment level is still the same. So we're getting more bang for our buck out of our recovery than the rest. So you may have seen, I think Scott just shared Beaverton there. They're projecting enrollment. It's not only not recovered, it's gone down even more this year. So some of these bigger districts are seeing that. Now, we have seen a decrease in the birth rate, so I think that's going to affect all of us, but it seems like we've done better than most in the recovery phase so far. So this is a really, really key slide, I think, because it really shows the picture here. So what we're looking at are 4 distinct bienniums, the one to come and 3 prior years. So it's kind of nice to look at so TFR stands for total formula revenue. So the sheet that's in your, I think it's the first or second page of the budget in the front section, it's the state school fund allocation sheet. And so when we say that in 17-18, $37 million was our total formula revenue, that's made up of the property taxes, common school fund, potentially some state timber, county school fund, and of course the big chunk of that is the state school fund. And that's what makes up our total formula revenue. So you could see in this biennium, the allocation was $8.2 billion allocated on this was actually the 50-50 split year. And you can see, we get an amount per ADMW. So again, ADMW stands for average daily membership weighted. So while our enrollment might have been 3,900 to 4,000, we were paid on 4,520 ADMW. So the additional weights, if you want to, you could pass that one out. That comes from, you get an additional half weighting for English language learner students, an additional full weight for students on a individualized education program, special education students, up to 11%. And typically we've been at about 13 to 14%. And then there's some poverty weights and things. Kim is passing out. This is the 23-24. So you have the first part of the funding part, the dollar part in your packet. This is the other part that we get, and how the students are broken down and how those additional weights play out. So what I'm really wanting to show here is in the pre-pandemic days, Silver Falls School District ADMW was about 0.65% of the total state ADMW. So you can see we were at 4520 weighted with 706,000 statewide. So then you could see what happened here. Again, our enrollment loss started happening in 2021, but we were paid on the 1920 year here, and so were all the other school districts. In fact, all the other school districts, this was the high water mark for statewide ADMW, and then all of a sudden reality hit. So these were, again, numbers more that people were experiencing in 2021, and so now we were getting paid on 2021 or 21-22, whichever was higher, and they were both bad. So you could see we went down to the 4155. So it was bad enough that we lost 10%, but we also were less than our proportionate share because we lost more than most school districts did. But we've really flipped the script. Again, recovery at 35 or 40%, I mean, that's good, but again, we didn't find out until February that the state numbers had not recovered. They actually went down further. So we're all of a sudden, even though we're still down 6%, we're almost back to our proportionate share of the enrollment and therefore the dollars. So when I look at this, you could see that this was tough to swallow because we started this biennium with less than we started the previous biennium. But now, this number was better than even we were budgeting when we were sitting here last year by $1 to $1.5 million, I think. So if we go back, really, this here, most of this loss occurred last year. And this year we're almost back to where we would have been for this level of funding than if the pandemic hadn't happened, just because, again, the state number is so low. So this number here is this you'll see matches the the data that you have in front of you there, both the sheet you were just handed as well as the funding estimate. So we've got that initial estimate. Again, it is based on $9.9 billion. So I can tell you that because we're at 0.64%, every $100 million of additional funding is worth $640,000 over the course of the biennium. So $320,000 a year. So going from 9.9 to 10.1 would mean an additional $1.3 million over the course of the biennium, or approximately $650,000 more each year. Does this make sense? I know it's a little busy, but I think this is really key to, because when we don't have ESSER funds, the total formula revenue makes up about 95% of our general fund revenue.
Can you go back to just real quick for the visual, the slide that had the excess, keep going back, the excess funds left over, this one?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So this was a big thing to go through tonight to make sure everyone understands it. So, you know, the ODE site, there's a link down here. So when this gets posted on Board Book, this is an active link that will take you right to the public site for the state school fund estimates. You can see, just to illustrate, so this is the estimate you have in your notebook for Silver Falls. But you can see like how many estimates come out for one single state school fund year. We are in the mode right now where there's still three state school fund years open. We're just finally getting closed out for 21-22 where they did their reconciliation adjustment, because they have to do that after the audits are done. And so that'll be closing up, but a state school fund cycle lasts 27 months. So right now we've got 23-24 open, 22-23 which will be open until next May, and this one that's just closing out. So, and that's kind of our normal life, but this wild swing in statewide ADMW and not knowing what's going on with the other 196 school districts, it's tough to wait for some of that data. Now, we had this graphic last year, and it said, funding cliff is looming? The funding cliff is here. So Scott mentioned it in his message, and we've talked about it a lot, but the federal ESSER dollars, which stands for Elementary Secondary Emergency Relief Fund, or something like that, they came in the 3 waves in the 3 different federal stimulus packages, and ESSER 3 actually can be expended through 9/30/2024, but our district received quite a bit less per student than neighboring districts. Some districts received 3 times as much as we did because the allocation was based on Title I. So I project that our ESSER funding will be exhausted by September of this year. So there is a little bit budgeted in the federal funds because it's embedded in the general fund, but that's pretty much going away. But it helped keep us afloat. So those monies, obviously, we know ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. We looked at a detailed report before on this, but those were pretty much used right out of the gate to help with the online learning and PPE and other things that we needed right at that time. And then the ESSER 3 allocation was quite a bit larger, and the uses were expanded. And so that's really helped with learning loss, you know, keeping maybe even though our enrollment dropped, not having to cut staff so we can help kids with social emotional learning, unfinished learning, those types of things, and really helping sustain our operations. The other thing, so obviously we took a hit, $2 million hit in state school fund revenue, but that wasn't the gap. The gap was even bigger because expenses kept rising. So ESSER funds and FEMA reimbursements. Has anyone worked with FEMA reimbursements? They're long and tedious. We actually had 2 different claims and many different projects within those claims going on. So again, I want a huge shout out to Kim and then our accounts payable specialist Raya and others for sticking with this. We're actually seeing the fruits of this labor now. We're getting these payments in. there's a lot of districts that didn't even try the COVID-19 FEMA deal, and they were building the plane as it was in the air. They didn't even know what they were going to cover and not cover. So we kind of had to say, well, we think that might be FEMA or that might be ESSER 3. So we went through kind of a year of trying to figure it out. You know, they did determine we're not covering technology, but they did cover PPE and other things. So I think what COVID-19 FEMA is bringing in about $600,000 or $700,000, yeah, from March 13th, 2020, all the way through what? 12/31/2022, yeah. And then, of course, the ice storm, we were in a declared emergency area. So that's just wrapping up too, and we're starting to get payments for that damage as well. The other thing that we did that are more ongoing measures, you know, we were always looking closely at the, you know, the attrition factor, and there were some times maybe where a hire was delayed or maybe not, or didn't happen for a period of time. And then another big one here, in the fall of 2021, we were able to take advantage of the very low interest rates, and we went out with 20 other school districts in a pool for a pension obligation bond, which the district did do in 2003 and 2004, and is benefited very well from that. We did it again, and we've saved $700,000 a year now for these first 2 years. Future savings is dependent on the investment performance of the side account, but we did get the best borrowing rate in the history of the program. I think it was below 3%. So I'm very, very excited about this. So those are just some other things that occurred during this period. So finally, that's the history. Talk a little more about this budget specifically. These were the primary objectives, and we only hit 50%. So budgeting to the strategic visioning plan. That's what Dan and Leslie presented, and Scott. Retaining current service levels. We're hitting that mark within this budget. Aligning current resources and current requirements, which basically means we're not depending on reserves to fund the budget. $600,000 short of that mark, and we're at the $10.1 billion threshold. Now, I believe that if the state budget does get to 10 or 10.1 billion, I believe that there's things that can happen within the year. For example, I don't know that we need to charge as much to PERS because we have more salary and other funds now, that we might be able to drop what we charge PERS to pay our PERS debt service, for example. There might be, again, some attrition that we may have. We already know of some retirements that are occurring. So there's a number of things. At a $600,000 deficit, it's about 1% of our budget. I think it's manageable. But the scary part of it is our ending fund balance at $2 million. That's a lot. That's harder to accept than if we were at, say, $4 million, because things could go the other way too. The Robert Frost boilers went out this year. That was not in the budget, and it cost over $200,000. So those are things that can happen the other way. Again, Scott, Leslie, and Dan have done a fabulous job of talking about our dollars and how they tie to the strategic plan. Please don't even try to read this, but this is coming your way next. So this is kind of the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. This is a sheet that we developed, I think, between the 2 meetings last year that was well received, that allows a one-page look at how schools are resourced and staffed. And this is not just the general fund. So basically, you know, by school, you're seeing the enrollment, and then you're seeing the direct classroom instruction from licensed teachers. And then you have a section for other licensed instruction. And then other licensed supports, like special education teachers, Title I licensed professionals, and ELL licensed instruction. And so you have a total for that. And then you get into what we call basic school support FTE, which includes principals, licensed counselors, and then classified personnel. And they're broken down into different categories. So that is really how it's laid out. And you get to the total FTE. So you can see total FTE. And then the very last column set on the right is weighted membership. Now this again is the key. We talked about ADMW, so you saw what the enrollment is, or projected enrollment for the school, and then you see how many ELL and IEP students they have at those schools. And again, ELL students are weighted at an additional 0.5, so that's taken into account in this formula. And then IEP students at 1.0. So really, I think the bottom line is you get to the final column, and you can see ADMW per FTE by school. So you can kind of get a flavor for that, because I really think this does the best job of showing all of the supports that are provided the students, which also includes that weighting. And so there's some key notes at the bottom. You can see this sheet represents 386 FTE, and again, most of this is in the general fund, but some of these are coming from our special revenue funds. All of the funds that Leslie spoke to in the integrated guidance are in your special revenue funds 2XX. There's different funds within that. SIA is Fund 251. High School Success is Fund 252, for example, and there's all sorts of others. All the federal Title I, IDEA, and so forth are in 201. So those supports are accounted for here. The FTE that's not included on here, you can see below, district-wide specialists. So we have school psychologists and speech paths and autism specialists, behavior specialists. They serve all the schools. So they're not plugged into any specific school. We did not break up their FTE, so they're not there. Our maintenance personnel are not in there. And, those of us that work in support services in the district office are not on here. But this is just the supports that are directly provided, to the students. So, are there any questions on this? Okay, I know we could talk about this more later. So I think a good segue for that, Kim, is to speak to, I guess we could pass this out. So, you see how, a great majority of our FTE is, supporting the students and by building. This supplemental sheet if you recall from the video, the OSBA webinar, they talked about, in the general fund anyway, salaries and benefits usually equates to about 80% of the budget. Well, you can see at the bottom there, this calculated out to 78.9%. But we feel like this is really important to show here because, again, it's 80% of our budget, and you can get a better idea how the costs break out, because when you look at the actual budget document, to keep the page count down, salaries are rolled up to the, they're the 100 series, but it's not broken out by license, classified, admin. That's what this does on one page, so it makes it easier to look at. So you can kind of see, again, starting with the licensed, so we have a general fund column, and then we have those that are funded out of special revenue funds, or the 200 series. That's where all the FTE live, full-time equivalents. So you could see, and again, this has the freshest of data coming straight out of our bargaining agreement. So this is costed out to reflect what was provided for 22-23 and in through 23-24. An average teacher cost essentially of $111,600, which does include licensed specialists and counselors, not necessarily just teachers, all licensed personnel. Classified staff, you can see what our FTE looks like there. Administrators, a total of 17.5 FTE. And then supervisory and confidential, non-represented staff, people like myself, department heads, tech, a few in maintenance, business, HR are included in this group. And then one thing that really gets lost in the shuffle is the additional payroll and stipends. So there's a lot of other things going on out there. There's our extra duty coaching schedule, both at the middle school and high school level. There are stipends for head teachers, for example. We have some personal leave payouts, sometimes vacation payouts for 12-month employees, and all that has to be tracked somewhere. So that has a special objects all their own. So just to kind of give you an idea of that cost, I mean, in the general fund with taxes and PERS, that's an additional $1.3 million. Now the breakdown on these benefits are, taxes are generally just a little over 8% when you take into account Social Security, Medicare, workers' comp, transit tax, those types of things. PERS right now, our total PERS percentage is about 24%. So the rates are going up slightly this next year, but because of that UAL and what we need to charge payroll, I'm projecting our PERS cost, at least as a percentage of payroll, will remain pretty flat for this upcoming year. So we're not taking a big hit there. So about 24% there. And then insurance, for most groups, if someone was to take all their insurance benefits, it's between $20,000 and $21,000 per full-time equivalent. Now, we do have an opt-out, so some people opt out and get $400 a month there, so we tend to save a little bit in totality, but we budget as if everyone's taking their insurance. So that's just another area that could help us a little bit. So hopefully this is helpful for you as well.
Steve, just a quick question.
Yeah.
These numbers look pretty equivalent to what we've seen in the past, roughly.
Mm-hmm.
So we're seeing the reserves drop pretty dramatically. Since our costs per student seem to be relatively equal to what we've seen in past years, as far as our overall payroll cost, why are we seeing such a drastic reduction in our reserves?
Well, the average teacher cost of about $112,000. I mean, that was when I started.
I understand that, but also our revenues have gone up, and our bulk of the district's costs are in personnel.
Right.
Always have been around 80%. And in my mind, it's not quite equating here.
Okay. Well, our revenue didn't go up this biennium. A 1.5% increase. Obviously we did have ESSER funds, but we were also paying for a lot of things that we would have never had to purchase in the first place. Inflation, utilities, transportation costs, all those things are going up, probably higher than the rate of revenue that we're receiving.
So are you saying that some of our costs beyond personnel costs have gone up more dramatically than our personnel costs?
Well, I would say, there's another slide that'll show our total personnel costs. Maybe that'll help, and if it doesn't, then we'll do some further analysis. But this is just a slide. Let me come. I have a couple slides that might help with that in just a second. So this is just to show, that we, because of these new funds like SIA and High School Success, our total profile, and we used the whole analogy, and there's another slide for this, the sun and the stars last year. That's coming back in a second. But back in the day, the general fund was 94% of our 100 and 200 fund profile, because we pretty much just had Title I and IDEA here, and now it's 84%, 16% split. So there's a lot more of these special revenue funds, and therefore this integrated guidance plan that we talked about. This is just a sheet that's in your folder, basically explaining all the different funds and how they work and what numbers they are as a guide. And then, we used this last year to say, the size of the sun was shrinking because of what we talked about, the enrollment decline and that type of thing. And then we had these one-time help pieces here that are going to be going away. They go away, but these are these other sources that, again, Leslie has outlined in her presentation. And then last, I was going to get into some budget assumptions, and I also have a 6-year history on these costs that I'll show you. We've talked about some of these. We're right now at a 10.1 enrollment gain, net gain of 43 students. General fund, ending fund balance is budgeted at $2 million at 6/30/2023. Employee cost, licensed staff for next year is a 1.9% effective COLA, or cost of living adjustment, plus an additional $25 a month in insurance per the collective bargaining agreement. Classified staff, we've budgeted at 5% COLA plus 25% or $25 more per month in insurance. Bargaining starts next week. That's for 23-24 forward. And admin, confidential, non-rep staff, step plus 3% COLA and $25 more per month in insurance. And that's not yet finalized. PERS costs, as I mentioned, flat. So here's the actual, this is the revenue side, Wally, but, and this looks crazy because we did the pension obligation bond. So we had to receive the bonds and then send it right to PERS.
Sure.
To reduce our rate and set up a side account. So this is the revenue side, but here's the expense side. So expense by object, so the 100 series, or the blue, is salaries, the green, benefits, yellow is purchase services. So purchase services include, the big one is transportation. It's about $3 million per year. All of our utilities for our buildings, you know, audit costs, legal fees, instructional support and guidance, our nursing services, those are all
Food service in there as well? Or is that different?
Food service has, this is just general fund, so food
Oh,
service
okay.
is fund 299.
Okay.
But yes, that would be in the 300 series because we pay Sodexo. It's not, food service, there are employees, so that's payroll costs in fund 299. And the cost to Sodexo to help manage, and the food purchases are in the 300 series. Yeah, great, that's great. Very good.
This is helpful. That makes sense.
Thank you, Wally. So yeah, so then that's the purchase services there. And then the light blue here, that's supplies and materials, which is not just consumable supplies. There's non-consumable supplies as well as software, hardware, textbooks. So, yeah, that number will be bigger this year because we do have 600,000+ in textbook adoption budgeted in the general fund, as Leslie discussed earlier. And I'll show you what page that's on. And then again, this is wonky because it's in the other category. This is where the whole pension obligation bond transaction took place. That's just an anomaly. And then other here, what was that other? Yeah, what is that? Well, we have transfers, and I'm drawing a blank on the rest of that part. I'll have to get back to you on that. So anyway, so yeah, hopefully that helps a little bit. While you can kind of see the progression, you can see this. Was it? The numbers are a little small here. So the 1920 year, you saw the jump. That was when we finished the bargaining 3 years ago, and then you can see an increase here as well. So it has gone up. Fortunately, we have stabilized here a little bit on the benefit side. You know, we saw some PERS increases back in here, but we've been able to keep that at bay a little bit. So that,
Steve,
like,
quick question for you.
Yeah.
The other, or sorry, is that, having a hard time seeing difference between capital and other? So like
Oh,
in
yes, yes,
2023, the 2.939 million, is that capital or is that other?
You know, I'm gonna have to check on that. I'm sorry.
That's a big increase.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah. We'll look at that. Yeah, 'cause since some of these turned out so small, we had to put these numbers out to the side. So yeah, since we just kind of finished that one this afternoon, I didn't get a chance to burn it into my mind.
Maybe comparisons on the salary. I mean, you're at two and
Yeah, and this is 22, 23. So yeah, I need to I need to get that answer for you. Will you write down the follow-up questions? Yeah.
Yeah, we're at like but
Yeah.
you look just at salaries, you know,
Right.
like the expenditures,
Yeah.
that's over $2 million increase just in 2 years in salaries.
Yeah, we'll get that,
you know.
we'll get this part figured out.
And
So,
these salary numbers reflect the recent bargaining
uh,
or the 20?
Kim, this was the 22-23 budget, wasn't it? Yes, it is not yeah.
So it's probably even higher,
Probably
actually.
higher, yeah.
We are not, it's a very complex process.
But what we have in the 23-24 budget, as well as what's reflected on the sheet, reflects what just happened. This is just what was adopted. So this, actually, these numbers are going to be higher when it's all said and done for this year, for salaries and benefits.
Steve, can I ask a
Yeah,
question?
yeah.
The purchase services
Mhm.
is quite a leap. Do you have an idea of like, is that because of the changes in transportation services?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Hillary. Yes, I know that that's going up at least a couple $100,000. I know we have to add a few more routes, and then there's just an inflationary element to the contract
Sodexo too, I think.
with First Student. What's that?
I think Sodexo had an increase.
Well, they do, but that's not in this fund.
Yeah.
But yes, you're right. It is going up as well. Utilities, we have an increase in utilities. And also another item that I was going to point out specifically in the budget document is, Brian probably knows this, but the LBLESD's old student information system is retiring on June 30th, 2023. It's going away, and they did a wonderful job for 20, 30 years with this. So we are transitioning to Synergy, and it's going to cost an additional $100,000+ a year. So that's in purchase services because we contract with LBL. We are getting additional features. I don't know if Leslie can, there's a lot more to it than what we have. So.
Yeah, we're actually, the small amount, which I think it's only around $10,000 from the EIIS fund that I presented about, is going towards it, but we're getting a lot more student data integration, and so we'll be able to run a lot more really awesome reports at our buildings to track student data. So there's a lot of great things about it, but it is much more expensive.
Steve, within the purchase services, that would also include like our educational coaching and our professional development fees would be captured in that, correct?
It would be in that object family, yes, but it'll be in Fund 251.
Because of the state school fund?
A lot of that's been funded out of SIA. I think a small portion, like for the ELL portion of the mapping, came out of Title III, for example, which is EL. Again, those are in special revenue funds.
And then the other part of that would be anything related to our bond consulting fees and everything
yes.
like that too, right?
Great question. So there is in the superintendent function, I think it's the 2320 function, there's $50,000 budgeted in there, and then there's also money, $150,000 in the 4,000 series, which is for capital. So that's to make sure we have some appropriation in there, but some of the costs associated with a bond effort or, a consultant or a project manager could also be in there. So essentially, $200,000 within the general fund. Yeah, and I failed to mention in the 430 fund later in your budget. That's capital project funds. Most of you here already know. Just a few weeks ago, we were awarded a $2.4 million seismic grant for Silver Crest for their library building, but it also extends into some of their classroom wings. So we're really excited about that. That was on the bond list, and it was kind of with an asterisk if we got the grant, which we went into a dry spell. We had 6 grants early for the first 4 years of the program, totaling about $7 million, which helped a number of our buildings. Then we struck out for a couple years, but we got this one. So we're going to be starting a design phase with the engineers shortly, and the work in earnest will be done probably in the summer of 2024. So that's budgeted. Some of the costs are budgeted in the 23-24 year because some of the engineering work and planning will occur expense-wise in 23-24, and so that'll happen in the 430 fund.
Can you remind us how much the insurance went up?
Oh, yes. Well, we haven't gotten the exact number, but we were told to budget 15 to 20%. And so That's happened like, I think, 3 years in a row now. Now, that is something that actually lives in other objects. Liability, property casualty, just for this year was already over 300,000. So that's going up at least 15%. We're working with Larson Flynn right now on that renewal through PACE.
Yeah. That's some of the inflationary pressure.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's huge, huge jumps. And what's interesting about the insurance is, for a while, it was the property part that was going up more than the liability, and now it's completely flipped. So.
Also want to mention, we've seen in purchase services a larger need for substitutes due to absenteeism.
Yeah.
And that is a purchase service.
Yeah, so that, thank you very much for bringing that up, because that's something back in, was it around 1920 or 1819? We went from having our subs that were actually employees of ours. People we'd bring and sign up, they'd be employees and pay through payroll, and so those would fall into this category. We then signed up, like most districts in our region, with a firm called EduStaff, and so we pay them, and the subs are employees of EduStaff, and so it reduces the administrative burden to do that, and we actually get a pretty good rate. We think we're actually saving money on that. Plus, it helps us actually fill the vacancies better, and it helps the people that are willing to do the work, because most subs are working for at least a couple, 2, 3 districts, and they don't have to go sign up with every district and figure out when the time cards are due at each of the districts and when they get paid. And like in our district, we pay once a month, but at EduStaff, they pay every 2 weeks, and they get all of their districts converged into one payroll. So it jumped, because it's a purchase service, into this category from employee costs here 3-4 years ago.
Well, the simplicity is nice, but you've somewhat lost then that control, being they're a third party, right?
Mhm.
So you have to comply with.
The Willamette ESD is a partner in that. They're kind of a conduit for getting people signed up, and we have our absence management program. Kim could probably explain it better than myself, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, somebody who's interested in subbing, pretty much in the majority of districts throughout Oregon now, they register with EduStaff. They still are required to go through background checks and the same security clearance that Willamette ESD is still involved in that part of it. And then it is every district still sets their own sub rates and sets their own preferred substitutes, and we actually feel like it has been a win-win across the board, and most of the feedback we hear is very positive. There's always some pros and cons to things, but it has seemed to be very well received overall. So.
Was your question about controls?
Financial.
Oh.
I was just curious then, but you
We
get
set
to
the
dictate
rates.
the yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Daniel, you could take the slideshow down now. Thank you. So, Mr. Chair, I'd just like to take 5 minutes on the document, and then I know I've probably talked way too long already, so I apologize.
Ready, set, go.
Okay, thank you. So we've already talked about some of the documents here in front of us, and so I just want to say, just to reiterate the format, I know for some people it's great because it fits the way you look at documents, and other people not. But this is a state prescribed format, and the very interesting thing to me about this is you go through this, there's a summary page for resources and requirements, and then when you get to the detailed part, so the resources report, this will show you the detailed revenue line items for every fund, and before you get to the requirements or the expenses. But what I wanted to just mention is the columns. And I think this year it's more important than ever, because when you look at the columns, the columns you have to have are 2 years prior actual. So in this case, 21-22 and 20-21. And then you have last year's adopted budget, 22-23, and then this year's proposed budget. I don't think there has ever been a time where you would look at these 4 columns and they would look that radically different. And it's because of what we went through in COVID. So, you know, there's going to be things in 2021 like transportation and, you know, coaching and other things that in subs that went down a lot because there was not in-person instruction. And then all of a sudden you hit 21, 22 and, you know, we got back to in-person instruction, but didn't get rid of the masks until the spring of that year. So things started floating back, but not at its full level. And then in 22-23, we budgeted for and are living being fully back all year for the first time, more back to normal, like you know, back in 2019-20 all the way up to March of 2020. So you'll see kind of like when you look at a specific category, it kind of tells a story, and some of those categories will look different. So, and then again, as far as the account number structure, it was covered in the video, and you know these are the types of things digging into the document that you know definitely have time to talk more about here tonight, as well as at the second meeting, but also at the coffee hours, and also please between meetings. Also, feel free to send emails with questions. I'll make sure they're all answered and shared with the group as well. Get it answered and put a document together with all the Q&A for the final budget document. So just a few line items I wanted to point out after talking about the format is if you go to, you get to page 29, you start to get into the general fund requirements, and you'll see that they're broken out by major functions or activities. So in this case, it starts with 1111, elementary K through 5. Any function that begins with the number 1 is a direct instructional support. Anything that begins with the number 2, which will come later in this section, is a support service. So that would be, you know, counseling, transportation, speech pathology, human resources, fiscal services, and you know, facilities. So you're going to go through the whole 1000 series first. So 1111 is elementary K-5. 1121 is middle school 6-8, and 1131 is high school. ELL is 1291, migrant 1293, alt ed 1280. You'll see in 1288 we have our charter school pass-through payments. So that total formula revenue we get, part of that is for the charter school, and they have a different formula for the funds they get. So those pass-through monies are in that 1288 category for Bethany and Community Roots. As far as when you look at each function area, function program, the objects are associated by those categories we saw in that graph that we looked at last, the 6-year history. You have the salaries and the 100, 200 in benefits, 300 in purchase service, 400 in supplies, etc. So you can see how those are broken out by function. So then you get back into the 2000 series. The nice thing that you get to on page 40 is you'll see the total for the whole major function 1000. You can see a budget of $30.5 million and 281 FTE for instructional services in the general fund. And then on page 41, you start to go through the 2000 series. Now you can see right on page 41 in function 2110, which is attendance and social work services, in the 300 series, 380 non-instructional professional and technical services, you can see it jumped from $90,000 to $227,330. That is synergy. You'll see, because many people don't know, we have one on page 42, student safety, function 2115. Again, this is another purchase service through the city of Silverton. Object 380, $120,375. That is for our SRO. And that's not new. It just, cost goes up a little bit each year. One thing I failed to mention in the 1000 series is the 1220 and the 1250 functions are your special education categories. You can see, again, you start going through, you see assessment and testing, instructional staff development. The Board of Education category is 2310. Aaron, you asked earlier about some consultant costs, so you can see the 380 purchase services, non-instructional, professional, and technical services, $145,500. That is $50,000 for legal fees, $40,000 for audit or annual audit that's required, and $50,000 for consultant fees. We also have some money budgeted in the 4000 series as well. Again, you keep going through, you'll see Superintendent Office 2320, Office of the Principal, Fiscal Services, HR. And one really nice thing I'd like to point out that's, I think, an enhancement this year is when you get to page 54, there's a whole schema change here. And for quite a long time, we've been using just the parent function, 2540, which covers all things facilities and maintenance. But thanks to Luisa's help, we were able to change that now. We are using the sub-functions, if you will. You'll see it starting on page 55. Service area direction, 2541. Care and upkeep of buildings, 2542, which is where custodial services live. 2543 on page 56, which are our grounds crew. And 2544 maintenance, that's where our repair folks live and our HVAC technician. So you can see that those are broken out better for you. Now there's going to be a little bit of previous year's budgets that was just in the 2540, but this year's budget's moving to this new format. So I think that'll be helpful. And we've actually been using, in the past, we've used 2543 for actual expenses. We just didn't necessarily always have it budgeted there. Or I guess 2544, excuse me. And then security services, 2546. So hopefully that's helpful. And then of course on page, the bottom of page 57 and the start of page 58 is another big hitter category, student transportation services. So the total there is on page 58. You can see we're close to $3.3 million. But as a friendly reminder, and for those of you that don't know this, 70% of our transportation costs are reimbursed to the school district through the state school fund formula. And you'll see a transportation grant category on the right side of that sheet that's in your notebook. So you get through the general fund, and then starting on page 70, you start to get into the other funds, 200 funds, which we've talked about quite a bit tonight. We're actually, ODE has prescribed this 200 parent. Everything rolls into the parent 200 special revenue, but nothing detail-wise is being tracked there anymore. They're being accounted for in the sub-funds. So once you get to page 77, all of our federal grants are in the 201. That includes Title 1A, IDEA, which stands for Individuals with Disability and Education Act. So it's supplementary special education grant funds. And then you can see that ODE on page 80 has mandated that food services be tracked statewide in a Fund 299. We used to have it in Fund 210, so you can see that in parentheses. So you'll have to jump to the end of the 200 section to see that. And then you get to page 82, and that's where you start to see 250 is kind of our state grant special section. And you get to page 83, and that's where you start to see student investment account. So Leslie mentioned in her presentation that the allocation right now is for 23-24 is approximately 2.5. I think it might be closer to 2.6. Now we believe that there's a possibility that allocation might go up. We've been closer to $3 million the last 2 years. And we budgeted for, I think, 2.9-ish for this upcoming year because of the graph that I showed you earlier, our proportionate share of AD&W has grown from the time our initial allocation came out. And of course, we don't know exactly how much they're going to dedicate in the state budget to SIA yet. So there's a lot of unknowns, but if anything, we think it could go up. We won't find out until June, so that's when the state budget's passed anyway. So, and then high school success is a bit unknown as well, but I think that $1 million is a pretty safe bet. That's Fund 252. The thing about these funds, the budgeting here at this point in time is a little less exact than in the general fund at this point. There's, yes, unknowns in the general fund, but here, because integrated guidance planning, which is really, this whole process is still new, and because of the allocation unknowns, some of the expenses in terms of the exact areas they're in still may need some massaging in terms of where that all lands. The key is that we have things put generally in the right places and that we have the right appropriation amount there. So those are the two big hitter funds within the 2.5 series. And then one thing we didn't really talk about tonight yet was in Fund 253, we have a preschool promise grant. I think we're in the second year of that operation, and we're looking forward to getting another state grant for that for about $250,000 again next year. And then the last 2 years, on page 96, you can see that we have a special fund 255 for summer school. The last 2 summers, the state allocated quite a bit of money, I think somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000 for summer school. They're not doing that this year, but we still put a placeholder of some funds in case they do release a smaller portion of money for some limited summer school for this year. And then when you get to 259, we have some other miscellaneous state grants like our youth transition program and some other programs there. And then the 200 fund, kind of the forgotten fund, but it's actually a pretty big one, is our student services fund, and that's where our agency accounts live and student body accounts and things for all of our schools. So we have to have money set aside for accounted for there, and that's directed by our schools. And then you get into our debt service funds, which debt service funds, page 107 is the food service fund, so $299. And then page 108 begins our debt service fund. So it's very important to know the difference on these. So 310 is the fund that tracks our general obligation debt service. So what we budget there, $4,351,955 is exactly what we need to pay next year on our debt service. Again, this bond retires in June of 2027. I also failed to mention earlier, in the fall of 2020, we again took advantage of the low interest rates and refinanced the bond, saving Silver Falls School District taxpayers $1.3 million over the last 7 years of the bond. So if you look at your last tax statement, you should be paying about $2.01 per $1,000 of assessed value right now. Fund 320 on page 109, that's where the pension obligation bonds live, both our 2003, 2004 series and then our recent 2021 series. So that's the debt service for that. So we just have to set a rate that we charge payroll to make sure that then they come over as basically like a transfer of funds to this fund, and then we pay. The state actually intercepts the money from our state school fund, and then the payments made in November and May on this and on the general obligation bond. And then the 330 fund, to be able to get the middle school up and running as it operates today in 2015-16, the district acquired a full faith and credit loan from Columbia Bank, which is now Umpqua, for about $2.3 or $2.4 million, and we still have 4 or so years, maybe 5 left to pay that off. We pay $235,000 a year on that debt service. So Fund 430, I talked about that earlier. That's on page 112. Any fund that begins with 4 is for capital projects. So this is where we will track our seismic grant for Silver Crest. So we've budgeted some funds there. Don't know exactly how much of the expenditure will occur on the 23-24 side of the bridge versus the 24-25 side of the bridge. And then we have some internal service funds starting on 114 where we keep track of our unemployment reserve, insurance reserve, a little bit of self-insurance there for meeting deductibles, print services. And then the 700 funds mostly have to do with the charter schools because we're fiduciaries for them. They are their own organization, and they have their own board and make decisions about their own, their budgets and those types of things. But we do their fiscal services for them, including payroll and accounts payable, and we have to keep track of their funds within our budget as well. So again, I apologize for taking so long, but a lot of important information, I hope. But I'm done, Mr. Chair, and I know that took a lot longer than 5 minutes.
You emptied the reserves of your allotted time there.
A quick question, if that's okay, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Super easy, Steve. And I'm sure I'm just looking at this in an overly simplistic way. On those first 2 summary pages, resources on Roman numeral 10 and requirements on Roman numeral 11.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if I just look at this and say that's why it is overly simplistic, but I'm curious to know what's missing. If I look at what we quote unquote spent in 2021 versus our resources, there should have been $4 million left over, right? And then in 21-22, resources were 106 million, and what we spent was 101. Is that an overly simplistic way of looking? Because then I'm thinking, where's all that? Why didn't that go to our reserve? Where's that extra money?
Because that's a great question. And the other thing too is the actual years, you will see a difference between revenue and expenditures, of course, but in the budgeted years, they should be balanced, which they are. But when we're talking about the reserves, we're talking about the general fund. And this is across, all funds.
All
and so we
funds,
do have
okay.
money, in our student services fund, and we have money in our debt service. Like, so we have some reserves in the PERS account and the insurance account and unemployment, and the charter schools have some reserves. So this is across, the whole body, the whole budget, all funds.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, we will move to public comment. I don't see anybody here, but if you would like to speak during public comment and are attending virtually, please use the raise hand feature on Zoom.
There is 2 people online, and they are both part of the business department.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
All righty.
They're gonna watch it on the recording.
Yeah. Do we have any questions, comments?
I have a comment. I'm really concerned about the direction about reducing our reserves. I'm thinking back, I think it was the 2008, 2009 timeframe. Our high reserves at the time really allowed us to continue operating with minimal impacts to the district. I was working in the Washington County area during that time, and I remember hearing some of my coworkers talking about what's going on in specifically Beaverton, and it sounded like a horror story about what's happening at some of the high schools there. So, and I think I'm seeing a little bit of a disconnect with Leslie's presentation and your comments, Scott, about trying to get our reserves up. In that, if we get additional revenue from the state, there's already plans to spend that. Why don't we use that additional potential additional revenue to go against our reserves?
Earmarked, right? I mean,
Yeah.
this SIA money we have to spend. We can't put it in our reserves.
If we don't spend it, it doesn't come back to us.
Okay, gotcha.
So use it or lose it, basically.
Yep.
All right.
And the nearly all the grants are on a reimbursement basis. All the federal grants, we always spend the money and then do quarterly claims. They'll allow us to do
Okay.
more frequently than quarterly. The state ones work the same. They have done a little bit of advanced funding on the SIA, but still, yeah, you can't just, bank the money.
Okay, thank you. So I guess I would just encourage the district to look at attrition to try to save costs.
I'll piggyback that. I'd really like to see us not dip into the 2 million or 4% that we're sitting at. And I'd like to know what trade-offs are on the table that would get us there. You know, what you had to have talked about it. So what didn't you include in the budget that you might have if you were going to go with a balanced budget? And you know, that way we can talk about it as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's reasonable.
Well, the textbooks would balance at 10.1. I mean, that's straight up, gets us there. But it's a discussion item. I already cut the total projects for this, and you know we don't usually have too much for projects, and most of the maintenance budget is for our daily upkeep. So we have anywhere from, say, $500 to $1 million for projects, and I think for the third year in a row, I put out the parking lot redo out here for now, until we know more. We do have to proceed with the locks. We waited on that for a couple of years and getting some better radios at the high school. And I do have an updated facility, that sheet that I did. We'll have that. Luis got that done here for me today, but I'll roll that out and post it before the next meeting so we can look at that and look at the projects more thoroughly as well.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, Steve, I got a question. I guess I'll piggyback on, I share concerns about our low reserves, and I'd like to see that come up, but but I'll argue the other side here. I believe, if I'm understanding it right, the state is now building a pretty good rainy day fund, so that when we get like massive recessions like we had back in 07, 08, they can dip into that, I think, so that hopefully we won't see the massive swings from the state funding. Is that true? Do I perceive that right, or is there someone else here who could better answer that question?
I understand. I understand your question. So, yes, the state reserves are at unprecedented levels, over 20% right now. To get to the 9.9, I think they did already earmark all of the corporate tax kicker, which is supposed to go to K-12 to get there. But they clearly have more they could use. Now, I understand they're trying to protect against recession hits, and they don't want to say, oh, well, we allocated 10.1, now we have to cut that back. I'll never forget the worst single year in my business official career was the 2002-2003 school year, the second year of the 01-03 biennium, when the wheels fell out and they cut the allocation. And then you were in the second year of the biennium, so to get one FTE, you were halfway through the school year, and you had to cut 2 people just to get one saving. You know what I mean? So that was a really, really hard year. Then of course we had the recession, 08 through 2012, and the state quarterly forecast went down for 7 quarters in a row, and they may have cut funding a little bit, if I recall. But of course, then there were stimulus funds then as well that were one-time money that helped. So they are trying to hedge against that. But I also want to say it's important to remember, they did not cut through this time. 9.0 did not change. 9.3 did not change. Our state school fund revenue went down because our enrollment dropped. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't like they cut what they promised they were going to give us. It stayed the same. It's just everything changed because our proportionate share went down. Mm-hmm. Does that?
Yeah, that helps. I'm just trying to, that's changing the policy from 10%, lowering that's going to be a board level discussion. And I'm just trying to just gather my thoughts around it. And
I personally believe 8% is adequate, but yeah, I definitely don't like being at 4.
Yeah, I mean, if I understand it right, and the state has that 20% budget, then that seems to be a logical thought. Anyway,
I think Max, you had a question.
I was just curious on some of the deficit and how much of that, if you weighed it out, was due to the drop in enrollment. I mean, we talked about
the COVID and the recent negotiations with the teachers, and that's going to be an impact. But if you weighed all that out, if we had 100% of that, those folks that we lost, we only got 33% back. If we got the rest of those back, would that offset most of that, or is that really just a small piece of the pie?
I mean, certainly if any more increase of our return would have helped us that much more. Yes, absolutely. This
Would it
year.
made us whole if we had that full enrollment?
Yeah, if we jumped right back to where we were and the state was still where they're at, yeah, we would have actually, we probably would have made it for what we lost last year.
Sure.
Right, instead
So
of a $2 million net loss, we would have.
Do we
improved that.
foresee that enrollment's going to continue to go up? Are we predicting that, or?
I know. I don't see us getting back to pre-pandemic levels.
Okay.
No, not anytime soon.
Okay.
But I think one thing that we do need to do this year is do a fresh demographic study. You know, it's been, 5 or 6 years, and pandemic later, since we did that Portland State study. So we were just talking about that the other day. We think that's important.
Yeah, I recycled mine. Finally,
Yeah.
because it's not relevant anymore.
Question. Just on the summary slides, first of all, Steve, thank you for walking us through that, because it was extremely helpful to walk us through kind of the high-level summaries and then get down to the budget. I think that this format was a lot easier to understand.
Thank you.
Than even in past years. So it gets better and better every year. So thanks. If I saw the figure, I saw like a negative $600,000. That's kind of our net deficit that we have to dip into reserves for this coming year. Am I correct?
As it's projected,
As
with
projected.
the information we have right now, yes, that is correct.
Yeah, that's where it's at now.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's also the cost of the textbooks.
Can I
Gotcha.
ask a question on that textbook? You're really talking about like textbooks in each classroom that we use, not technology. Hardback.
It's both. So for K-5 math, they've been working with materials for over 14 years. They haven't had any new materials. And so we had a team of teachers review all materials on the approved list this year, pick out the new materials that came and presented to the board. It's iReady math materials, so it's both textbooks in the classroom, it's diagnostic testing, updated instead of STAR, Renaissance STAR math. It would be updated math tests that kids would take that is more advanced. It's all online materials, it's teacher resources, it's professional development for teachers to teach them how to use the materials. So that's one example. It's K-5 math, 9-12 math, because they have all new standards in high school for math now, and so they've been pulling their own resources together for those courses. So they're looking to purchase materials to help support them and teaching those now. And then 6-8 English language arts, they are looking for updated materials as well. So this is one of the things that we push off in budget years when it's very difficult to balance the budget, and the teachers are really looking for support in this way too.
It's almost like deferred maintenance.
Right.
First time in 14 years we've had a literacy adoption. So the standards 14 years ago were so different that the materials aren't even relevant anymore.
Yeah.
So this is the first year for that.
So, and I thought I heard you guys talk about how 24, 25, there's a lot brighter outlook.
Yeah, so math and language arts tend to be the two most expensive because we have teachers K-12 teach those subjects, right? So next year, the subject up for adoption is science, and that will be a lighter purchase because secondary definitely will want to look at materials and review what they're using, but elementary, they use a variety of materials that it just looks different. It's not the same level of materials, so that we anticipate that would be a much lower budget, and we would go into it budgeting less.
Can I just piggyback on what you were saying, Erin, about the 600,000? So I've heard 9.9 and I've heard 10.1. are we budgeting on 9.9?
No, 10.1.
We are budgeting on 10.1.
I
Okay,
believe
because
if-
that difference is literally the $600,000.
Oh, yeah, it is,
Darn it.
yeah, I know, yeah. Well, 10.3 would.
Well, that would do it.
All
That's right.
No reserve
Did
dip in.
we-
We get that.
There are a lot of districts, surprisingly, including Hillsborough, that are rolling out $10.3 billion
Wow.
budgets.
Wow.
But not Beaverton, they're 10 point.
I'm sorry, Jonathan, I interrupted.
So do we have things that are designated, earmarked, if they go to 10.3 that we're on the hook for? Is there anything related to salaries or anything else?
Oh, you mean like the trigger? No, that went away.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank
yeah,
you.
yeah.
Just double checking where we landed
Oh,
on.
with the agreement.
So that's another thing about 24-25. We hit the 51% funding year, the textbook adoption is behind us, and that year and this year really is quite manageable, in licensed contract. Now, we are just beginning the negotiations with the classified, and we know there's a big ask coming there, so we have to keep that in mind too.
So as an example, we could, if we wanted to, choose to say if they go to 10.3, we can do all the textbooks, and if they don't, we wouldn't, and we'd be balanced. Is that a true-ish statement?
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
it is.
10.3 would not require reserves to be used for the textbook.
Right.
With the assumption that when we're receiving 51% next year, we would be able to fulfill that 600,000 and some.
At 10-1.
Just next year.
We'll get a larger amount of state school fund revenue in 24-25, yes. Assuming that the enrollment at least stays
A
stable.
few other factors.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I've got another question. I don't want to but you projected a 45 student increase. What was that based on? I'm curious.
Well, just some of the data we're getting, from the schools. And I also noticed, even on our state school fund estimate, if you look, we're probably projecting light on some of our weights. So you could kind of equate some of that to weights as well. Like ELL, you can see we're probably projecting about 30 low right now. We'll have a chance to update that, and we would get compensated accordingly for that. I'm also very curious to see, again, these are some of these little things that can swing either way, but Brandon was here Monday night, and he did an excellent report. I meant to mention this earlier. Brandon Larson, our Special Services Director, if you want a little more knowledge on Special Services, and didn't have a chance to see his presentation Monday, he did about a 15-minute presentation that you could watch on video from Monday night to see a little more about how the department works. But I think he reported about 470 or 80 IEP students, and right now, as we were working with him just today on his projections for next year, because a lot of students are being evaluated right now. We're actually looking at over 500 now, 520 some, 570 when you include the charter schools, but because we do provide some special education services for them, but 520 plus. We get capped out when you look at that ADM sheet at 11% of enrollment, and then they have a pool for above 11%. And typically, we've been about 13% of our enrollment on IEPs, and now we're closer to 14 or 15%. So, but if our proportionate share has increased for our ADMR, our regular just student enrollment, it's possible that we might get a little more above that 11% cap, which could really help as well. So it'll be really interesting to see, and we won't get another estimate for a while, but those are just little factors within the formula that could really have an impact as well. So those are some of the things, Jonathan, and the transfer window just opened again, so that's more information that needs to be gathered. We're starting, Heidi Everly has reported that we're seeing a more pre-pandemic push of transfer requests. For example, for those that don't know, we are a heavy net in migration school district from other districts. Usually about 10% of our high school population are from students that live outside of the district boundaries. So we're starting to see that a little more. We're getting some of the kindergarten roundup data as well that look pretty positive. So that's kind of where that's coming from at this point. We do know our worst case scenario is whatever our ADMW was, this year. That would be our worst case scenario for funding for next year if it doesn't go up.
Right, but 45 at 10,000 is $450,000, right? So that's almost two textbooks too, right? So I'm trying to figure out what's the, what's the backup plan, I guess.
Well, it would have to be, some layoffs in my opinion.
I just think it needs to be out there because we don't know that we're going to get 45 more.
Exactly.
Anybody else? All right, so next is just our next meeting, so May 25th, 7 p.m. right here. This is the plan. Any other business, future agenda items?
We'll get all these additional materials posted tomorrow on this board book agenda, and then next week we'll get the board book agenda for the May 25th meeting, posted with probably a few additional materials. And please reach out to me if you're interested in a coffee hour time.
All right, well, thank you all, and yeah, we've got our homework for the next couple weeks. All right.
I'll put a plug in for the coffee hours. They're great.
Thank
you. Awesome. I'll be drinking. Sorry.
All right, meeting adjourned, 9:15.
Thank you all.